Hello and welcome to our webinar on where to start with financial literacy. I'm Tamana, head of B2B marketing at Florence, the app that lets you fill your shifts with people that you trust. With me today, I have financial advisors Will and Ed from St. James's Partners. I let them both introduce a little bit about themselves briefly and their areas of expertise. Over to you, Ed.
Thanks, Ivana. Hi, everyone. My name's Ed Evans. I'm an advisor with Stringerman Chartered Financial Planners. We're based in Berkhamsted. I've been doing this role for coming up on a year now. Before that, I worked in St. James's Place head office with a particular focus on the investment side of things. That sort of remains my specialism, really, but dealing with clients from all walks of life, those just starting out, those well established, and helping them to achieve the lifestyle they want and then keep it once they've got it.
Amazing, thank you. Will.
Thanks, Tamana. And yeah, hi guys, my name's Will Oswald. I've also been a financial advisor now for coming up to just over a year. And similar to Ed, also worked at St. James's Place, went through their graduate scheme, working in different areas of the company, from the strategy side to the investment management side that Ed was also a part of, and the technology side. So I've had a lot of experience in different areas. But yeah, made the move into being a financial advisor just because I wanted to work more closely with people, help them make smarter decisions with their money, and ultimately, as Ed said, help people live the lifestyle they want and use money as a tool to be able to do that. I'm a big believer that money alone can't create happiness, but it does play a part in allowing us to do some of the things that we enjoy that do involve money. So yeah, happy to be here and hope you find it useful.
Amazing. Thank you both for your time, and to our viewers for watching this. And hopefully you can go away with some tangible actions as key takeaways from this webinar. So let's just dive into it. I love both your experiences is perfect in terms of our audience today. So essentially, we want advice for our nurses who've just, even including our student nurses that have just graduated, and carers in general who are on low income. So I guess my first question to you both is, where does somebody start, especially when they don't have any savings to begin with? So there's a lot of chat about investing, and to most that's quite alienating, especially when they don't have any savings. So what advice would you give to somebody who is literally starting out and has zero knowledge of any kind of financial literacy?
I'll start. That's a great question, Tamana. Yeah, thank you. I think it's a tough one. I think my view is best place to start is financial self-awareness. Understand your own financial position, know what money you've got coming in, know what money you've got going out. Even if it's just making a list, make a list of your rent, bills, your commute costs, your food, understanding exactly what is coming into the account, going out of the account, and ideally trying to make that balance. It's particularly important, I think, now with cost of living and all the rest of it. Particularly important when you're at that early stage when you might be your first experience of a substantial paid role, your first experience perhaps of renting or paying bills, and so being on top of that is from my perspective the most important thing. Once you've got that understood, about trying to run a bit of a surplus, see if there's anything you can do, the little wins to maybe make sure that you've got earning slightly more than you're spending. Money saving experts got some great tips for that. Changing your providers, cancelling some of those subscriptions can be great things to do. But essentially just making sure that you're set up, that you've got that budget right, and then moving in the right direction from there. What do you think, Will?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, great points, Ed. And I think just to build on that, I think, yeah, the first port of call is definitely becoming aware of your finances, where it's going, what's going out, what's coming in. And I think you can kind of break that down in terms of the what's going out. I think, as Ed said, a really good first place to start is to categorize your spending. And what we tend to do with a lot of our clients, and this applies to everyone, is to categorize it into what's your essential expenditure and what's more of your leisure expenditure. And when we look at your essential expenditure, it's okay, well, what is the bare minimum I need to survive? If you had to go into survival mode, you weren't having much fun, but you're able to live and exist, what would you need? So we tend to put in that your rent or mortgage, council tax, water, electricity, and other utilities, and basic groceries and transport costs. if you put that all together and understand what your essential expenditure is, that's a really good first sort of exercise. And then within that, as Ed said, shop around. I'm sure you're familiar with comparison websites. Look at whether you can save money switching providers, whether that's electricity, water, gas, mobile phones, and also within your groceries. Could you shop elsewhere? Do you have to buy the branded item, or could you buy the supermarket's own brand? And then once you've looked at that and you're almost minimizing the cost there and switching where appropriate, then you can look at your leisure expenditure. And that's more of the things that we enjoy spending money on, whether that's going out with your friends and family, eating out, doing various hobbies, sports. That's the bit that probably there's more wiggle room. And if you're earning more, you can probably spend a bit more on that. But if you're not earning a lot and the spending's constrained, this is the area we can cut back on more. And as Ed said again, I think you want to ensure that you're always sort of living within your means. It's super easy nowadays with the Klarnas and the buy now, pay laters to get yourself into debt quite quickly. The availability of credit cards and other payday loans can be really damaging. And so my first bit of advice would just be to do whatever you can to spend within your means. And then if you're doing that, hopefully, again, as Ed said, there's a bit of surplus income. So everything that's coming in minus everything that's going out, there's a little bit left over, and start looking at saving and investing that. And my biggest bit of advice would be to just make a start. If it's 10, 20 pounds a month, just create that habit. And I always say it's better to kind of start doing that at the start of the month and pay yourself, your future self first. So when the paycheck comes in, put maybe 10, 20 pounds in that savings account, as you would do into the account that pays for all your bills and other essential expenditure. And then rather than waiting till the end of the month when you spent your paycheck, you've already made an allowance for your savings and investments, and you're less likely to spend it. And it is an investment in your future self. So it's really important. But that's where I would say starting again, Money Supermarket and Martin Lewis, they're great for sort of that general awareness. Another one that I really like that's maybe more focused on investment as well is Money to the Masses, free resource, some really interesting content. And I think once you're aware of your own financial circumstance in terms of spending and income, I would then look at these resources just to upskill and educate yourself.
Wow, that's some great tips that I'll actually be using myself. And there's some great provider names there. So really going back to basics and understanding your ins and outs before you can even think about investing. So let's just say I've done that exercise and now I have, let's say, £50 to spare in investing. There's so many different options there. There's stocks, there's index funds, there's individual stocks, and there's a lot of chatter about compound interest. And so where would you say is the safest bet for someone who has zero financial or trading or stock investing experience that is, I guess, safe in some way? Because everything is going to have high, risk to it. But if you don't have a high risk appetite and you just want to get on the investing ladder, where would you advise?
Will, do you want to start off with this one?
Yeah, sure. Let's go for it. Yeah, so it's another really good question, and I think Ed alluded to it earlier. It's quite scary the first time that you do invest, and I think you see a lot of horror stories out there and a lot of success stories that are quite polarized. Either someone's just made a load of money because they invested in the next hot cryptocurrency, or actually the opposite. Last year, people lost thousands of pounds in cryptocurrency, which, by the way, is extremely high risk, and I certainly wouldn't advise starting there. But I think because you see all of this, it is quite scary, and it is very different to just having your money in a bank account or a savings account, because with that, the money is secure, it's capital secure. You know that it's not going to reduce in value. You might earn a little bit of interest, but it's not going to go down in value. Whereas what you've got to understand with investing in different assets, whether that's stocks, so owning shares of the biggest companies in the world, such as Apple and Google, or whether you're investing in bonds, which is where you loan money to governments or private companies, or actually other assets such as property, commodities like gold, and things like that. There's all these different assets you can invest in. But what you've got to understand with these is that the value can fluctuate. It can go up and down. So you've got to be prepared that you will see. And the one thing I can guarantee you is you will see the value of your investments fall over time. But over the medium to long term, we tend to talk about 5 years plus, and that's the key thing with investing. You need to be in it for the medium to long term. Otherwise, it is better off keeping your money in cash if you're going to be using it within 5 years. Over that medium to long term, we hope to see a better potential for growth that would grow much quicker than if you just left it in the bank. Now, that being said, what to invest in is the next question. And I think it really depends on your attitude to risk, and kind of how willing you are to take on risk, and how you feel about the value of your value of your fund going up and down. And then it's working out, okay, well, what platform or provider do I use? Personally, I'd say if you want somewhere to start, there's a lot of good what are known as robo-advisors out there. I would suggest starting there, because what they'll do is they'll use a risk-based questionnaire, and they'll ask you several questions to try and understand your attitude to risk. And they'll generally suggest a portfolio, an investment portfolio that's appropriate to your level of risk. And they will invest your money essentially on your behalf across lots of different assets, lots of different shares, lots of different bonds, so that you're spreading your risk, and you're growing your money in sort of a risk-adjusted way. As for specific names, I don't know if I'm allowed to suggest specific names, but there's lots of providers out there. And as with anything, I would suggest doing your own research. But this is a nice way of having some sort of guidance and support on that investing journey, rather than just starting with an investment universe of, say, 120,000 different funds and stocks. Where do you start? This is a good way of starting. Yeah, I'll hand over to Ed and see if he's got any other tips to add.
No, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head there. I think from my perspective, to take it back perhaps a step further. I mean, you mentioned, Tamana, at that point when you maybe do have that £20 a month that you are putting aside. You know, as with all personal finance, you know, the most key thing is making sure that you're safe. You know, that you've got that financial security as the bedrock before you start thinking about the investment side, or start going a bit more complicated in that sort of direction. So, you know, first port of call may well be just making sure that you've got that cash in the bank, easily accessible, set aside, so that if a rainy day comes, which might be, you know, a surprise bill, or it might be, you know, a few months out of work, or a few months of illness, you've got enough cash to see you through that storm, without being forced into the vicious cycle of debt. And, you know, we'll talked about that earlier. I think it's one of the most important things to learn early, is that debt can be a very useful tool in financial sort of management, but it can also be a vicious enemy that you want to avoid as much as possible in many cases. Once you've got that, that's when, you know, we can start thinking about the more of the investing side, more of the longer term stuff, as Will's mentioned. I think for me, the first question with any investment is to, you know, ask yourself why. What are you doing it for? Understand what it is that you're trying to achieve with your investment, and predominantly understanding what your timescale is. You know, is this buying a house in 3 years? Is this, you know, maybe being able to retire at you know, 65? The answer to that question then sort of opens the rest of the conversation around, well, given what we're trying to achieve, how do we then think about investing things on the ground? And, you know, we'll allude to it earlier. If you're looking at those very short timescales, maybe investing isn't the answer, actually, because, you know, you might find yourself taking on just too much risk for what you're trying to achieve. If it is that, you know, 3-year house purchase, probably, as Will said, you're better off staying in cash. If you're looking at that much longer term, that's when you can think about, you know, that investing side. And you know, I think Will's done a very thorough job of talking through that side of things. One thing I would just reinforce from him is the idea of diversification. Key principle to investment, making sure you don't have all of your eggs in one basket, essentially. And that applies to, you know, buying, when you're thinking about buying stocks, for example, thinking rather than just buying a single stock of a company you like, thinking, actually, why don't I buy this fund that deals in a certain style of companies, rather than holding one thing, hold 40 of them. Just mitigate some of the risks that are inherent in investment. And I think something else that is important to get across, and I wish I'd been told when I was, you know, just starting out as well, is that actually investing's hard. And over the last 10 or so years, there's been a very good run in markets, and I think it's given rise, particularly with social media and all the rest of it, to a bit of a sense of this is easy. I can dip my toe in the water and become very rich very quickly, and don't have to work too hard. And I think it's really healthy to reinforce in people that actually this stuff isn't easy. You shouldn't feel that you're not doing the right thing by not feeling that it's something you're comfortable with. And it's, from my perspective, it's the importance of doing, as Will says, making sure that you're investing in the right way, making sure that you're spreading your risk, making sure that you're getting some sort of advice, whether robo-advisors might come in, so that you know that you're behaving sensibly.
Amazing. I completely echo that, because I feel the same with my own personal investing journey. Sometimes I feel confident. I hear a podcast, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go do that. I'm going to go invest in that fund, or maybe I look into that, and then I don't actually do it when it comes to it, because I get cold feet, and I'm like, oh, actually, I don't have any experience. I don't know what I'm doing. So maybe I'll wait until I have a little bit more information, and then I just don't ever have the time to do my own self research. So I guess my next question, following on from that, is there any help available to, like graduates and just people on low income, starting off their careers, that they can go to and say, right, okay, I don't have the experience, but where can I start? And where somebody actually, because it's kind of what you said, Will, as a service, or we can work with someone that can then direct you in the right direction. Now, I'm assuming there's a cost associated with that. Are there any services or any help for, without charging people, I'm guessing? I don't know if I'm putting it the right way. Basically free financial advice and sort of direction, start things with.
Yeah, I mean, happy to just start with this question. There's so much sort of resource out there that can be actually a good and a bad thing, because it is, again, where do you start with all of this? As for sort of specific advice for specific people, there's not sort of a free financial advice service as far as I'm aware. Like I said, there's robo-advisors that give you generalized guidance, which is slightly different to advice. And there's lots of websites where you can sort of do your own reading around finances and investment markets. And like I said, I would definitely suggest doing that, just to educate yourself and help you get comfortable with the idea.
Can I ask you which ones you would recommend? Just which one of those?
Yeah, sure. I mean, personally, in the past, I've used Nutmeg. It's one of the biggest robo-advisors. They've got a really nice user interface. They make it very simple, really easy to use. They've got a nice website and a nice mobile application. And there's lots of videos and online content that they provide as well to help you upskill and educate yourself if you want. They'll help you start that journey. And I think that's it. They're making it very accessible and at a very reasonable price point. So that's one I've used myself, and I would never suggest someone uses something I wouldn't use myself, and I have used it. And I think it can be a great tool for people just getting started and wanting just to start investing without having to pick, as Ed said, individual stocks, which can be very risky. And they'll help you diversify your investment and help you understand the benefits of investing for the medium to long term, so you see the best returns. So yeah, I don't know, Ed, if you had anything else to add on that as well.
No, I totally agree, Will, and I think that makes very strong as Will says, on the communication side. It makes, is good at distilling it into something that's very sort of readily understandable. In terms of the wider resources out there, I mean, we've touched on the things like Money Saving Expert. You've also got some of the government sponsored sort of institutions, things like the Money Advice Service. Often it can be quite generic, but it does contain a lot of information, and particularly as a sort of starting level. It can be really good as well.
Excellent, thank you. Good nuggets in there. So I guess my next question is, probably should have asked this at the beginning, but it's what are your top tips for budgeting? Once you have your self-awareness, like, great, okay, I know what's going out, what's going in. So how would you go about budgeting? That's something I know most successful people also, they struggle with. I think everyone I know struggles with it. So yeah, it would be great to hear some of your top tips that you use with, especially with people low income, and how, if there's any specifics.
Sure. Do you want to go first with this one, Ed?
Sure, thank you. Well, absolutely, great question. So I think everyone does it differently, and there are different ways that work for different people. The way that I use that I find works for me is essentially I like to think of it as sort of running my finances as if I'm a business. So separating things out into quite specific areas. So, for example, I run several bank accounts. I have my main account into which my kind of income goes, and out of which my main outgoings go. Things like the rent bills. I have a separate sort of day-to-day account, which is where my sort of personal spending goes. So I allocate at the start of each month exactly how much I know how much I'm going to spend every week. In fact, on some of that more leisure stuff that Will was talking about, as well as things like the groceries. I send that from the main account into the sort of day-to-day account, and that means that I'm sort of limited to that amount that's there. I have a bit of a reserve in that separate bank account just in case I've got a particularly heavy week. I need to call on that reserve, and I'm topping that up constantly through any surplus I'm running. It's worked pretty well for me. I've only needed to bail myself out once thus far, so it's a system that I think is helpful. But one of the great things about a lot of the tools that are out there, and I use one of the digital banks for that day-to-day spending that has the categorization of different things that you're spending your money on. And what can be really useful is looking over time at what it is you're actually doing with your money. Because I often find myself surprised at how much I'm doing or spending on X, and being able to think, okay, it goes back to that self-awareness question. Now that I understand it, is that actually a sensible amount to be allocating, or should I start thinking more carefully about deploying it elsewhere? And another one of the benefits of doing it goes back to what Will said earlier, which I think is one of the most important things about making this budget, is being able to say, I know from the outset what I'm going to be putting away in savings this month. We all know that ultimately, if we end up with an extra £100 on our bank account at the end of the month, it takes a pretty special person to actually say, right, straight into savings with that. My view is, don't give yourself the chance to disappoint yourself. Put it away from the outset. It's just a much more effective way of doing things. Automate the process as much as you can. Will, what do you think?
Yeah, I think all really, really good points, Ed, and I would especially echo the categorization of spending. I think that's probably one of the most useful things I've done for myself. And back to where we started with this whole conversation, was once you know where you're spending or where historically you've spent it, then it's a bit of an audit. Okay, that's the past, that's been and gone. I spent it in these places, but looking forward, where do I want to spend it? And am I spending it in alignment with my values and what I find is important? So some that might be sport, to others that might be gifting to people, to others that may be charity. And by using a budgeting tool, you can see, well, that's where I've been spending it previously, but actually I'm kind of spending way more on, say, shopping than I like. I don't like spending on material goods and fashion items. I'd rather be spending on holidays, for example, and then set yourself monthly targets. So if you spent, I don't know, £300 on shopping last month, next month you only want to spend £50, and regularly review and have a monthly check-in with yourself. These were the targets I set. This is what happened in reality. And you don't need to beat yourself up about it, but just be aware of where the gaps exist and how you want to change going forward. So that's, I think, categorization is definitely a big one that I found personally really works, and is also helps you live a more fulfilled life by living in alignment with what's important to you and where you're spending your money in alignment with those values. The other more sort of generalized advice you sometimes hear is sort of the 50-30-20 rule when it comes to budgeting. And that's the idea that of your disposable income, so that let's say you get paid monthly, of the amount that gets paid into your actual bank account after tax and national insurance and other deductions, spending 50% on needs. So that was what we were talking about earlier, are the things that you have to spend on and just to survive. So your groceries, your housing, utilities, basic transport, things like that. So 50% on needs. Then 30% on wants. So that's like the shopping, eating out, other hobbies and sports. And then 20% on savings. And that's a rough rule of thumb. Obviously, it might not be appropriate for you if say, just by the nature of where you live and your expenses, your needs are just much higher than 50%. But generally, it's quite a good place to start. 50% needs, 30% wants, and then 20% saving and investing. And that's just a fairly basic framework. Another thing, just to sort of, I suppose I've heard before, which is quite a nice idea when it comes to saving and investing, as well as doing that at the start of the month, soon after you're paid, is called, what's it called? I've had a mind blank. It's gone. It's gone. I'm trying to remember.
I'll come back to you.
It will come back.
Yeah, but I love what you said here about categorizing and then living a more fulfilling life, because I tend to find myself spending a lot on sports and things, and then less on sort of other important things, I guess other people might consider important. And then I always do feel like, oh, I'm spending way too much on that. But again, if it aligns with your values and it's something that's important to you, then that's fine, as long as you've thought about it ahead of the month and you don't feel guilty about it. Because there's a lot of times there's a lot of guilt with spending, and then it kind of throws you off the rest of the month. I've had a bad month, so I'm not going to save. So I really like the categorization and really think about it from, I was about to say strategically, but just a holistic approach, and then living a more fulfilled life, because you've budgeted for that. So I love that. It's a great point.
I have remembered what I was going to say. There's a good TED talk if you're interested, called "Save More Tomorrow" by a professor called Shlomo Benartzi, I think is his name. And this is the concept of, if right now you can't afford to save and invest just because the needs expenses are really high, and there's just not enough coming in to be able to save and invest, you make a commitment that you save more tomorrow. And the idea is that you agree that any future pay rises, you look to save and invest a proportion of that. So when you maybe do have a bit more wiggle room and you've got a bit more disposable income, you've already sort of set yourself that intention that, yes, maybe my pay is going up by 5%. Of that 5% increase, I'm going to save 10% of it. And that's just a way, again, of setting an intention for the future. If you can't do it right now, and I appreciate we're in the cost of living crisis, and that excess money that we might historically have been able to save and invest, we can't. It's a way of just looking forward to the future and having some confidence that at some point you'll be able to, when you do have a pay rise and get a bit more money.
I like that. I really like that. Again, it gives you a bit of a peace of mind within yourself. It's okay, can't do it now, but I will. And it's really setting that. So that I really like that as well. Great. I guess that my last question is what role can employers or care home managers who are super busy, running off their feet all the time, how can they support their staff, especially the ones that are on low income or graduates? Is there anything they can do with organizations? Is there anything I don't know, anything that they can provide as a service for their workers and carers so they can be more financial literate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll put this one in. I will. I think it's understanding in particular, or being able to help your employees understand their finances and offer them the means to do that. I think being able to, particularly with new graduates, being able to help them understand taxes, for example. It sounds basic, but I know when I first started, I was fully prepared for my income taxes coming off, but I didn't even know what national insurance was, and it really threw my planning when 12% of what I thought I'd be getting, didn't turn up. I think helping people understand that from the outset is really important. Understanding workplace pensions. I mean, that's so important. I mean, it's particularly for those who are really starting off in their career, who may be, in their 20s or younger. Pensions seem like something that's very far away, that's not really relevant to your life, and frankly, you'd much rather have more cash in your pocket today than worry about something that's going to be relevant in 40-50 years time. I think if you take one thing away from this, from my perspective, alongside the budgeting, which is the most crucial one from my perspective, it's that your workplace pension is really relevant now, and the younger you start, the better you're going to do over the long term. And the great thing is your employer has to contribute too. It's, as far as I know, the only legal way to get free money. So it's a great thing to be involved with. But I think, unfortunately, it's still the case that a lot of employers don't really drill into their employees just how important it is and why it's valuable, rather than just fulfilling their legal obligations. On a similar theme, it's understanding sick pay policies and that kind of thing. The stuff that is, I speak to so many people who don't really know what their sick pay policy is, and often they don't have very much protection. In fact, if they did find themselves ill for months or even years, and I think that that's also something that is helpful to understand, even if you choose not to do anything about it. To know that where you stand, I think, is really important. So from my perspective, it's being able to educate your employees about these kind of things, and to make it a conversation that it's okay to have, rather than something that's left sort of in the back of your contract somewhere, without really getting much attention. What do you think, Will?
Yeah, again, really good points, Ed, and I think, yeah, the employer definitely has a role to help educate your team and your people. And I think, like you said, employee benefits, just understanding how they work and what they are. I mean, they are there as benefits to the employees, but many don't know how they work and really the true value of the benefits they've got. So I think awareness around that. I think just general sort of financial well-being support, putting on things like this. There's lots of other companies now that offer financial well-being solutions to staff, and I think I was reading a statistic the other day, and I think the biggest cause of stress for people is their finances. So we provide well-being support maybe on the mental side, but not on the financial side. So I think it's part of the employer's job now, when they're caring for their staff and their people, is to provide that financial well-being support, because it can be so valuable, and it has a knock-on effect to the mental well-being and also the productivity at work, absenteeism, lots of things that are all really sort of interrelated when it comes to your overall well-being. So I do think employers can partner with financial well-being providers, put on things like this, and encourage the conversation and invite staff to ask questions about their benefits and really understand what they mean and how they can get the most of it. I think the pension's an excellent point that Ed made. Historically, sort of the government and companies have taken a lot of the responsibility when it comes to planning for your retirement, but now quite a lot of it sits with us. And although we have the auto enrollment, which is where your employer has to basically contribute to your pension, that might not be enough for the future. So can you afford to put a little bit more in there? As Ed says, it's free money. And one of the things I would just say, a big bit of advice is just start and save and invest early. The earlier you start, the more time you have to grow your wealth over time, because of the benefits of compounding. And that's something we maybe haven't touched on too much today, but that's the idea that you get growth on the money that you're contributing, but also on the growth of the money you're contributing. So if you invested £100 last year, let's say it's worth £105 this year, next year you'll get growth on the £100 you originally invested, plus the £5 of growth. And it's just like a snowball effect, and it just gets bigger and bigger over time. So start early and invest as often as you can, and you will see the benefits. But it will be a bumpy ride, and there will be turbulent times, that I can assure you. But if you're in it for the medium to long term, you should definitely see the results, provided that you invest in it in an appropriate way.
And if I could just chip in really quickly, I think we'll touch on it there, but in the context of, from the employer perspective, ultimately it can really benefit employers too. If you have a workforce that's substantially less stressed, that is more confident and understands where they're going, what they're doing, how they're, is more comfortable and safe in their lives, it's a benefit for your business too.
Absolutely, no, 100% agree. At Florence, actually, we have a good tendency. We have a good. Now I've forgotten my words. We have a good habit of helping our colleagues and employees, just not within upskilling within their departments, but as well as understanding how they can be more savvy when it comes to saving. And we do run some lunch and learns, which have been so beneficial, and they can really take away some key takeaways from it. And I, as one, now feel like I'm a part of an organization that's constantly ensuring that the health and mental well-being of their employees are looked after, checked in with, and how the impact of cost of living, just start checking in to see, are you okay? Do you need more advice? Do you guys need to maybe speak to someone? And if, you know, in a position to be investing, definitely makes me feel like I'm at a place where I'm valued and really cared about. And it's a very small thing, but it makes a huge impact, because now I feel like I'm in a place that I'm looked after really well in every aspect. So not just in my skill set. So I absolutely agree. Amazing. Thank you so much for you both and your time. Sounds like we probably need another session to really like go into the crux of compound interests and investing. I think that's probably an avenue I would take if I was just beginning. Like I want to say easy. It's not easy, but it's probably the less risky sort of route to take. So hopefully this webinar will drive some demand for the next one. So thank you so much for both of your time, and we'll see you again.